I shared a cell with an alien woman. What happened broke every galactic law. He woke with a start, the metallic taste of recycled air filling his mouth. The world around him was silent except for the low hum of energy fields vibrating against the walls. His hands shook as he realized where he was. A cell, small, confined, unlike anything he had ever imagined. The floor beneath him was smooth and cold, and the walls seemed to shimmer faintly, giving the impression that they were alive. He pushed himself up, muscles stiff from hours of inactivity, and surveyed his surroundings. Everything was clean, sterile, and designed to control, to limit movement, to keep him in a space that seemed far too small for even one human. He had expected captivity, of course, but not this. The transport to the alien prison had been brief and disorienting, a flash of light and sound that left him dazed, and then the sudden drop into what felt like an invisible cage. He remembered being informed that the Galactic Council had decided his species, humans, were too unpredictable, too dangerous, or perhaps too fragile to be allowed free in certain areas. Fragile. The word stung, though he had learned to ignore insults from bureaucrats before. But he had not expected the prison itself to be so alive. He stepped closer to the far wall, expecting only emptiness. Then he froze. There was something there, something moving or perhaps observing him. A soft shimmer like heat waves rising from a surface, then a figure emerged from the faint glow. She was unlike anything he had ever seen. Her skin was pale, almost silver, and seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her eyes were large, dark, and intelligent, unblinking as they stared at him. She had a tall, slender frame, limbs longer than a human's but perfectly proportioned, and there was a grace in the way she held herself, even in a confined space. He swallowed hard. "Hello." His voice sounded small in the vast emptiness of his own fear. The figure's lips moved, forming words he did not understand at first. Then somehow, through a form of mental projection or instinctive communication, the meaning arrived in his mind. "You are not supposed to be here." He raised a hand slowly. "Neither are you, I guess." He realized that despite the small size of the cell, they were not truly touching. Some alien technology had created a divide meant to prevent interaction. That alone made him uneasy. According to everything he had learned, no two species like this were ever placed together. The council had rules, laws written in starlight and blood, prohibiting interaction that could cause what exactly? Emotional instability, psychic contamination. It did not matter. The barrier was there and the alien woman was on the other side. He sank to the floor slowly, trying to make sense of it all. How had they ended up in the same cell? And why was the council observing this without intervening? He had been imprisoned as a human, a supposedly weak and fragile species. And yet here he was, sharing space with a being from a species known for strength, intelligence, and psychic prowess. They were both anomalies, thrown together in a place that was not meant for them to exist together. The alien woman did not speak again, but he could feel her attention, like a weight pressing gently on his mind. He resisted the urge to panic. Fear was natural, yes, but it would only give her power. He had learned long ago that humans survived because they could adapt. Even here, even now, he needed to hold on to that. Hours passed, though he could not tell by the dim light in the cell. He watched her carefully. She did not move much, only subtle shifts, the tilt of her head, the flexing of her fingers. She seemed to study him as much as he studied her, eyes dark pools of curiosity and calculation. He wondered what she thought of humans. Had her species ever encountered humans before? Most of what he had learned suggested no. Humans were not considered capable of long-term survival in interstellar politics. They were unpredictable, chaotic, fragile, but he was alive, and she was alive. And for some reason, they were not dead. That fact alone seemed to make the cage less threatening, though it did not remove the fear entirely. He tried to speak again. "Do you understand me?" Humans were always different, always breaking expectations, always surviving when others would not. He had lived through conflicts, disasters, even death on the edges of human colonies. If there was one thing he knew, it was that he could survive. Maybe not alone, maybe not without help, but somehow he would find a way. Days passed. The prison was routine. They provided minimal sustenance, nutrient gels, water extracted from recycled air, and brief moments of light. Every now and then, guards appeared to observe, scanning them with devices he could not name, taking notes that he could only guess were reports to the council. He noticed that they never touched the barrier. They never adjusted it. They simply watched. He could almost feel their expectations, like a weight pressing down on both of them. That the human would fail, that the alien would dominate, and that some combination of the two would lead to chaos. But nothing happened. The human learned the rhythms of the prison, studied the alien, observed her reactions to light, sound, even his movements. He learned that sudden gestures startled her, that soft tones calmed her. He tested the limits of the barrier with his thoughts, sending images and emotions gently, cautiously. And she responded. Not verbally, not with words, but with pulses of feeling, subtle echoes in his mind that suggested recognition, perhaps even curiosity. He realized something startling. The connection was growing. Forbidden, dangerous, impossible, but it was there. One evening, the human decided to take a risk. He focused on the smallest gesture he could manage, the simplest thought: friendship, trust, survival. He projected it toward her, waiting. She paused, then responded in kind, a brief, shimmering acknowledgement that made his chest tighten. The realization hit him fully. The laws of the galaxy were being broken right here, right now. They were sharing something no human and no member of her species should ever share. A connection that went beyond barriers, beyond rules, beyond expectation. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. He had read stories about humans surviving against impossible odds, about humans forming bonds that other species could not understand, but he had never believed he would experience it firsthand. And yet, here he was, sitting in a cell across from an alien woman who had every reason to see him as weak, and yet did not. She saw him. As days turned into a week, their silent communication grew. They exchanged small thoughts, images of places they had seen, memories, feelings. It was cautious at first, but gradually more complex. He learned about her homeworld, the rigid hierarchies of her species, the psychic training that made her one of the most disciplined prisoners in the facility. And she learned about him, about humans, about resilience and unpredictability and the strange courage that defined his people. Neither of them spoke aloud. The guards had rules, and even a single spoken word might trigger alarms. But the connection continued, quiet and persistent, growing in strength and subtlety. The human began to understand something profound. He was not just surviving the prison. He was thriving in a way the galaxy did not expect. And she, the alien woman, was discovering something just as dangerous: that humans were not fragile, that they were capable of adaptation, and that connection was a power stronger than any law or barrier. By the end of the first cycle of the prison's rotation, he no longer felt fear in the same way. He had respect for the rules, for the guards, for the danger, but he also knew that there was something else at work, something forbidden, something that the council had never prepared for. And it started with trust. Not trust as humans typically thought of it, but a deeper understanding, a recognition that they were both alive, both conscious, both capable of change. And so, in a small, shimmering cell on the edge of the galaxy, a human and an alien woman began to rewrite what it meant to survive. They did not know what would happen next, nor did they fully understand the laws they were breaking. But one thing was clear: the universe was watching, and neither of them would behave as expected. The first part of their story had begun, and though the Galactic Council would call it a crime, they were creating something far more dangerous: hope. Days turned into a week, yet the human and the alien woman remained in the same cell, separated by the faint shimmer of the energy barrier. The guards continued their observations, their expressions unreadable behind layers of protective screens, while the human learned that survival here required more than physical strength. It required understanding, understanding not just the routines of the prison but the being that shared it with him. He noticed her patterns first. She moved with precision, every motion calculated and deliberate. Her eyes would trace the faintest disturbances in the cell, and her hands would twitch when she anticipated changes in the energy field. He could feel her thoughts brushing against his own, tentative at first, like a feather resting lightly on a surface. Each touch of her mind left impressions, shapes, colors, feelings he had no names for, and yet he understood. Humans were good at understanding. Adaptation was in their nature. One morning he tried something new. He focused on calmness, projecting an image of stability, of patience. Slowly he moved closer to the barrier, holding out a hand, imagining that the gesture might reach her, that she might sense it. For a moment nothing happened. Then a pulse, subtle, rhythmic, returned to him. He could not describe it fully. It was more than sound, more than thought. It was acknowledgement. He smiled faintly. That was all he could do for now. The alien woman's initial wariness began to show cracks. She did not lean away when he moved closer. Her eyes softened ever so slightly, and she mirrored his posture, matching him in stillness. The connection, invisible to the guards but undeniable to both of them, began to grow. They were learning each other, not through words but through presence and shared understanding. And the human realized something profound. She was curious. She was curious about him, about humans, about what it meant to survive in a universe that feared them. Curiosity, he learned, was a dangerous thing. The galaxy had laws against this. Curiosity could lead to alliances, cooperation, empathy, all of which were forbidden between certain species. And yet here it was, growing in the quiet space of a prison cell. Time passed, and with each cycle of observation, the human found ways to test her limits. He did not push, he nudged, gently, subtly. He projected small images of Earth, of green forests and vast oceans, of people surviving against impossible odds. The pulses he received in return were not just responses, they were communication. He began to understand her moods, her thoughts, the rhythm of her mind, and she began to understand him. Not just the human before her, but humanity itself, its resilience, its strange, unyielding determination. One day an alarm rang through the prison, a sharp, sudden tone that indicated a breach in another cell. The human froze. The alien woman tensed, her psychic field expanding slightly, defensive and ready. Guards streamed past, but they did not enter the cell. They only observed. Minutes later, reports would later show that the breach had been contained without incident. But for the human and the alien woman, it was a lesson in trust and timing. He noticed how she adjusted her stance, how she modulated her energy, how she anticipated threats. He mirrored her movements, not in mimicry but in understanding. He realized that their connection could be more than subtle thought. It could be action, coordinated and precise. It was dangerous, it was forbidden, and it was exhilarating. That evening, as the light in the cell dimmed to a faint glow, he focused on a new experiment. He attempted to share a memory, not just an image but a feeling, a sensation, a story of survival from his life. The memory of running through collapsing corridors, of finding hope when all seemed lost, of refusing to surrender even when the odds were against him. He pushed the memory gently into the barrier, hoping she would perceive the emotion rather than the specifics. She responded almost instantly. A pulse, stronger than before, sent warmth through him, a sensation of recognition that went beyond anything he had felt before. It was as if she understood not just the story but the meaning behind it. For the first time, the human felt something he had not expected. Connection, real and undeniable, across the boundaries of species and law. They began to experiment in silence. Small gestures, subtle thoughts, gentle movements. He would shift slightly and she would shift in perfect harmony. He would project an image of a distant star, and she would respond with the memory of its light on her homeworld. It was a dangerous game. If the guards detected too much synchronization, it would be considered a violation, perhaps punishable by termination. but the thrill of discovery, the beauty of connection, was impossible to resist. One morning, the human woke to find her watching him more closely than usual. Her eyes, dark and piercing, seemed to examine not his body but his mind, probing, testing, understanding. He realized that she was learning from him just as he learned from her. He had expected fear, aggression, or indifference, but what he saw was something far rarer, curiosity coupled with respect. He decided to push the boundaries further. Speaking aloud, though softly, he tried to convey a simple thought. "I won't hurt you." The words were faint, barely audible, but she heard them. The pulse that returned was different this time. It was slower, deliberate, almost contemplative. It was the first acknowledgement that she recognized him as an individual, not just a human, not just an anomaly, but someone worthy of consideration. The implications were staggering. In the galaxy, such recognition was forbidden. Species were not supposed to see each other this way. The Council's laws existed to prevent exactly this kind of empathy, this kind of understanding. And yet, here it was, growing stronger with each passing day. A week later, the human made a discovery that would change everything. He realized that their thoughts could coordinate subtly, not just emotionally but strategically. When the guards adjusted the energy fields or performed scans, they could anticipate it together. Not with words, not with signals, but with shared understanding. It was a dangerous power, one that neither of them fully understood, but it was undeniable. They were beginning to act as a unit, a single force of thought and adaptation. That evening, the alien woman initiated contact in a way he had not expected. She projected a memory of her own, not as an image but as a feeling of isolation, of being trapped, of surviving when no one else believed she could. The human felt it in his chest, a weight that was both heavy and empowering. He responded with empathy, sending back a pulse that carried encouragement, hope, and determination. For the first time, they were no longer merely surviving. They were collaborating. They were learning from each other, teaching each other, and challenging the laws that had imprisoned them. The guards noticed anomalies in the readings. Energy fluctuations, unusual synchronization patterns, unexpected stability. They recorded the data but did not intervene. Perhaps they were uncertain, perhaps they were fascinated, perhaps they feared the consequences of interference. But for the human and the alien woman, it was freedom of a sort they had never known. A prison that was supposed to confine them had become a laboratory of trust, cooperation, and survival. By the second week, a subtle routine had emerged. They would move, project, and respond in ways that were almost imperceptible to the guards but entirely clear to each other. Small gestures of solidarity, like synchronized shifts in posture or mirrored breathing patterns, became their secret language. It was forbidden, yes, but it was powerful, and it changed the very nature of their captivity. One day, a sudden tremor shook the prison, a warning that a security breach had occurred in another wing. Panic swept through the guards, but the human and the alien woman remained calm. They did not need to speak. Their connection allowed them to anticipate danger, to adjust their positions, to protect themselves. And for the first time, he realized that their bond could do more than survive. It could influence, even control, the flow of events around them. They began to understand the broader implications. If humans were capable of this, of connection, empathy, and adaptation, then perhaps the galaxy had underestimated them. Perhaps the Council's laws were not only restrictive but wrong. And if an alien woman, trained in discipline and psychic control, could learn from a human, then maybe species were not as separate as the Council believed. The realization was thrilling and terrifying. They were breaking the first rule of the galaxy, separation. They were forming a connection that could not exist according to every law and protocol ever written. And yet, they were alive, stronger together, learning faster than either could alone. As the light in the cell dimmed once more, the human looked at the alien woman, seeing her not as a threat but as a partner, an equal, a being capable of understanding and trust. She returned the gaze, and for the first time her expression softened completely. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible, but it carried the weight of a promise. A promise that whatever the galaxy demanded, whatever rules sought to control them, they would endure. In that quiet moment in a prison meant to break them, they found strength. Not in weapons, not in rebellion, but in each other. And for the first time, the human allowed himself to hope. Hope that survival was more than endurance, that it was connection, learning, and the courage to break rules that were meant to bind. The first step of trust had been taken. The first law had been broken. And the galaxy, though it did not yet know it, was about to witness something it had never imagined. Humans and aliens learning together, growing together, and beginning to reshape the very laws meant to control them. The human woke before the faint hum of the prison had even begun its usual rhythm. Sleep had come fitfully, filled with fragmented dreams of distant stars, collapsing ships, and silent corridors. His mind, however, felt sharper than ever, alert to the smallest movements in the cell. Across from him, the alien woman stirred as well, her form shifting in the faint glow of the energy field. She had been watching him more closely each day, studying not just his actions but his presence, his thought patterns, and the subtle cues that humans often left without realizing. He watched her too. It was a silent ritual they had established, a shared awareness that did not need words. He noticed the faint rise and fall of her chest, the minute adjustments in her posture, the way her eyes followed the subtle shimmer of the barrier. And then he felt it, an echo of thought, a pulse of recognition, like a message sent and received without sound or gesture. It was not just communication anymore, it was coordination. The human stood and moved deliberately, pacing the small confines of the cell. The alien woman mirrored him, her movements slightly offset but in rhythm, a pattern that neither guards nor sensors could detect. Each step was a test, each motion a study, each glance an exchange of understanding. He realized that they were learning from each other at a pace that no single species could manage alone. And the thought thrilled him. Humans were built for adaptation, for survival, for improvisation, and this connection allowed them to multiply those abilities. A sudden clatter echoed from the corridor outside, sharp and jarring. The guards had noticed something unusual, a minor malfunction in the prison systems perhaps, or a disturbance in another cell. They moved quickly, scanning and activating security protocols, but the human and the alien woman barely flinched. They had learned to anticipate. They had learned to coordinate. He projected calmness, subtly influencing her response, and she reciprocated, sending back a pulse that stabilized his own tension. Together they remained still, almost invisible in their stillness, while chaos unfolded just beyond the cell walls. Hours later, the disturbance had ended. Reports would describe it as contained, minor, insignificant. But for the two of them, it was confirmation. Their connection had practical value. It allowed them to perceive threats, coordinate reactions, and maintain composure in ways that neither species could achieve alone. The implications were enormous. They were no longer merely surviving. They were beginning to influence their environment in subtle but undeniable ways. The alien woman began to initiate more contact. Where before he had led the interactions, now she sent him small pulses, tiny fragments of thought or emotion that he could interpret, decode, and respond to. Sometimes it was a memory, sometimes an image, sometimes a sensation he had never experienced before. And every time he responded, not with mimicry but with understanding. He learned to interpret her signals, to anticipate her intentions, to meet her halfway. Their bond deepened, growing stronger and more complex with each cycle of the prison's routine. One evening, during a period of minimal observation, he took a risk. He projected a feeling of hope, carefully framed to avoid alarm. He sent it toward her, not as a demand or a command, but as a possibility, a choice. The pulse that returned was immediate, strong, and unmistakable. She had felt it, and she responded, expanding the connection in ways that even he had not expected. It was a simple act, but it broke the unspoken rules of the galaxy. Connection between species in this prison under these circumstances was illegal, forbidden, considered dangerous. And yet here it was, alive and growing. They began to experiment further. Small gestures, subtle synchronizations of movement and thought, tiny shared experiences that carried meaning far beyond their simplicity. He would tilt his head and she would mirror him. He would shift his posture and she would respond. He projected the memory of running across a frozen plain on a human colony world, and she responded with the memory of surviving a psychic trial that tested her species' endurance. Each exchange was a lesson, a study, a bridge being built across impossible boundaries. The guards noticed anomalies in the monitoring systems. Energy fluctuations, synchronization patterns, readings that did not match known behavior for either species. They recorded the data but did not intervene. Perhaps they were uncertain, perhaps they were fascinated, perhaps they feared what might happen if they disrupted the experiment. For the human and the alien woman, it was freedom within confinement. They could explore, learn, and communicate in ways that no one expected, using the cell itself as a classroom, a laboratory, a sanctuary. A week later, a crisis emerged. One of the prison systems failed completely, creating a cascade of minor alarms throughout the facility. Other inmates panicked, some thrashing against their cells, some collapsing under stress. Guards rushed to intervene, trying to restore order, but the human and the alien woman acted instinctively. They coordinated their movements and thoughts, projecting calmness, stability, and subtle influence. The effect was remarkable. Other inmates, sensitive to the energy shifts, began to calm. The prison, designed to control chaos, had been stabilized without a single act of violence. The human realized something astonishing. Their bond was not just about survival. It was a tool, a mechanism for influence, for leadership, for change. Together, they could alter behavior, coordinate action, and maintain order in a system designed to punish unpredictability. The galaxy had never seen anything like it, and neither had the council that had created the prison. That night they rested in silence, each aware of the other's presence without speaking. The human reflected on what they had accomplished. Not merely survival, not merely adaptation, but an influence that stretched beyond themselves. And the alien woman, for the first time, showed signs of emotion that he could interpret. Respect, acknowledgement, even a faint trace of admiration. She had learned from him, as he had learned from her, and together they had begun to rewrite the rules of their confinement. Days passed, and they pushed the boundaries further. The human began to test her understanding, presenting subtle challenges that required her to respond without breaking the synchronization they had developed. She met each challenge with grace, responding with increasing complexity and nuance. They were not simply reacting, they were anticipating, planning, adapting. The human marveled at the abilities of her species, at the discipline and precision, and he realized that their combination was unique. His adaptability complemented her control, her training amplified his intuition. Together, they were something neither species could achieve alone. Then came the moment that would change everything. During a routine observation period, the energy field between them flickered, an anomaly caused by a minor power surge in the prison systems. Normally, this would have triggered alarms, guards, and possibly punishment. But they reacted instantly, coordinating their movements and thoughts to stabilize the field. They had anticipated the surge before it occurred, and their combined action neutralized it completely. The guards were shocked, their monitors recording data they could not explain. And the human realized, with a thrill that coursed through his entire body, that they had achieved something extraordinary. They had acted in perfect harmony across species in a way that violated every rule of the galaxy. The alien woman regarded him silently after the event, her eyes reflecting something he could not name. Pride, perhaps, recognition, something deeper. She had seen the human act not out of fear, not out of necessity but with courage, insight, and compassion. And she had learned to trust him, not because she had to, but because he had earned it. Over the next few days, their connection deepened even further. They began to share more complex thoughts, not just images or emotions, but ideas, strategies, and lessons. He taught her about human ingenuity, about improvisation, about seeing possibilities where others saw only limitations. She taught him about discipline, control, and the precision of thought that her species had honed over millennia. Together, they built a mental dialogue that neither species was supposed to be capable of, a bridge across the boundaries of law, biology, and expectation. The guards became increasingly uneasy. The readings were unprecedented. Synchronization patterns, energy outputs, and subtle psychic exchanges had never been recorded. Some guards whispered that the human and the alien woman were dangerous in ways they did not understand. Others feared reporting too much, fearing reprisal from the council if their interpretations were wrong. Meanwhile, the two prisoners continued to grow closer, their bond a quiet rebellion against a system designed to suppress them. By the end of the second week, a new reality had emerged. The human was no longer just surviving, he was thriving. The alien woman was no longer just observing, she was participating, learning, and adapting. Together, they were a force that the prison had not anticipated and the galaxy had not prepared for. Their connection, forbidden and dangerous, had become their greatest strength. One evening, the human sent a message through the barrier, a simple thought: "We are stronger together." The response was immediate, a pulse of acknowledgement that carried weight, meaning, and intent. They had begun to communicate not just for survival but for purpose. And for the first time, he felt a sense of hope that stretched beyond the cell, beyond the prison, beyond the laws that had confined them. The human understood, finally, what this meant. Humanity was not weak. It was not fragile. It was unpredictable, resilient, and capable of forging bonds that could defy the galaxy itself. And if one human and one alien woman could achieve this in a single cell, then the possibilities were limitless. As the dim glow of the prison's energy fields bathed them in soft light, he realized that the bond they shared had already begun to rewrite the rules. They were no longer merely prisoners. They were pioneers, explorers in the realm of connection, trust, and survival. And the galaxy, whether it knew it or not, was about to witness the consequences. The human looked at the alien woman and allowed himself a rare smile. She returned it, a subtle gesture, almost imperceptible, but it carried the weight of acknowledgement and respect. In that moment, they were no longer just human and alien. They were partners, allies, and something more, a combination of resilience and discipline that the universe had not prepared for. And the prison, designed to break them, had become the place where their true strength began to emerge. The prison had grown restless. Rumors spread through the corridors, whispered among the alien inmates and human captives alike. Something unusual had emerged in the cell at the far end of the wing, something no one could explain. The human and the alien woman were different now, their silent coordination visible in the subtlest movements and the faintest pulses of energy. Guards observed, noting irregular readings, but they still did not intervene. The two prisoners had become an anomaly, a mystery the galaxy had never anticipated. The human had begun to notice patterns in the prison's routines. Guards rotated at predictable intervals, energy fields pulsed on regular cycles, and the surveillance systems, though sophisticated, had a rhythm that could be anticipated. He shared these observations with the alien woman, not in words, but in the rhythm of thought and gesture they had developed. Together, they began to experiment with subtle interventions, small acts that could influence the environment without triggering alarms. One morning, a warning siren echoed through the facility. A section of the prison had malfunctioned, causing energy fluctuations that threatened to release dangerous creatures from containment units. Panic erupted instantly among the other prisoners. Screams and alarms collided with the mechanical hum of the prison's energy fields. Guards rushed to respond, but the human and the alien woman acted before anyone could intervene. They had learned to anticipate each other perfectly. He projected calm and focus, and she mirrored it, extending the pulse outward. Their influence spread, stabilizing the energy fields just enough to prevent a catastrophe. The creatures were contained, and the panic among prisoners began to subside. Those sensitive to subtle energy shifts noticed a change in the atmosphere, a calming effect that no one could explain. The human and the alien woman had not touched a single system directly, but the outcome was clear. The crisis had been averted. The guards were bewildered. Reports would later describe the event as unusual stabilization and leave it at that, but internally, they feared what they had witnessed. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but this combination, the human's adaptability and the alien woman's psychic skill, was unprecedented. The prison systems, designed for control and dominance, had been influenced by two prisoners who were supposed to be weak and isolated. That night, the human and the alien woman rested in the quiet after the incident. For the first time, they allowed themselves to acknowledge the significance of what they had done. It was not just survival anymore. It was influence, coordination, and trust. They had acted together to solve a problem that neither species could have managed alone. And in doing so, they had broken another unspoken law of the galaxy. The idea that species must remain separate, each confined within its own abilities and limitations. Over the next several days, they continued to refine their coordination. The human observed how she modulated her psychic energy, learning the exact pulses that could influence objects and creatures within the prison. She observed his instinctive responses, his ability to improvise and adapt to situations that had no clear pattern. Together, they developed an understanding that transcended species. They could anticipate dangers, communicate silently, and manipulate outcomes without detection. One evening, a guard entered the cell for a routine check. The human and the alien woman froze, expecting reprimand or punishment. But instead, the guard paused, glanced at the readings on a handheld device, and muttered under their breath. The anomaly was growing stronger. Perhaps it could not be explained. Perhaps it should not be explained. The human realized that they were being watched more closely now, that their actions were being recorded, and yet the bond between him and the alien woman was too strong to ignore. A few hours later, another incident occurred. A group of prisoners attempted to breach containment protocols, threatening chaos throughout the wing. Alarms blared, energy barriers flickered, and the guards struggled to regain control. Without hesitation, the human projected calm and focus, and the alien woman extended her influence. They did not use force. They did not attack. Instead, they coordinated, guiding the prisoners with subtle energy and mental cues, steering them towards safety and order. The result was extraordinary. The attempted breach was prevented, the prisoners were unharmed, and the guards were left questioning what had happened. The human realized the truth. Their combined abilities were more than survival tools. They were catalysts. Alone, either of them might have managed a small portion of the situation, but together, they had the power to change outcomes on a scale the galaxy had never anticipated. This was the first step toward something larger, something that could challenge the rigid hierarchy and control that had dominated interstellar civilization for centuries. Word of the incidents began to spread, albeit quietly. Other prisoners, both human and alien, began to notice the calm influence emanating from their cell. They did not understand it, could not name it, but they recognized that the two prisoners were different. Hope, a rare and dangerous emotion in the confines of the prison, began to ripple quietly through the wings. Some of the prisoners whispered that humans were not weak, that perhaps the council had underestimated them. Others began to observe the alien woman with a mix of fear and admiration, realizing that she was allied with the human in ways they could not comprehend. The human and the alien woman, aware of their growing influence, decided to test their limits further. They began to experiment with subtle coordination, not just to stabilize systems, but to manipulate objects and creatures within the prison. They discovered that small nudges, almost imperceptible, could prevent accidents, guide prisoners, and even influence the guards' routines without detection. Each successful experiment strengthened their bond, reinforced their trust, and demonstrated the potential of cooperation between species in a way the galaxy had forbidden. It was during one of these experiments that the human realized something astonishing. The alien woman had begun to adapt to his methods, developing her own techniques that complemented his instincts perfectly. They were no longer acting as two separate beings. They were a single entity of thought, movement, and influence. The synchronization was flawless, a blend of human adaptability and alien precision that the Council had never imagined. Then came the day that changed everything. A major system failure occurred, threatening not just the wing but the entire prison complex. Energy barriers began to collapse, containment units malfunctioned, and alarms rang continuously. Panic spread like wildfire, prisoners screamed, and guards rushed in every direction. It was chaos, the kind of situation designed to prove that humans were weak, that alien discipline was unmatched, and that the rules of separation were necessary for survival. But the human and the alien woman acted immediately. They had anticipated the failure, understood its potential consequences, and coordinated their efforts flawlessly. The human projected calm, focus, and rapid problem-solving strategies, while the alien woman extended her psychic influence to stabilize energy fields and coordinate the prisoner's movements. It was a dance of thought, energy, and action that no one could interrupt. Within moments, the immediate threat was contained. The prisoners were safe, the system stabilized, and the guards were left stunned, their monitors showing readings they could not explain. It was an achievement unprecedented in the history of the prison. Two prisoners of different species had prevented catastrophe without the use of weapons, authority, or direct intervention. They had done it through trust, coordination, and understanding. The aftermath was remarkable. The Council's observers, hidden throughout the facility, reported the events as anomalies, incidents that could not be fully explained. Some suggested punishment, but others argued that the human and the alien woman had demonstrated extraordinary abilities and cooperation. The debate would rage quietly, but for the first time, the possibility of reevaluating humanity's potential emerged. In the quiet after the crisis, the human and the alien woman exchanged thoughts, not words. Gratitude, respect, and acknowledgement passed between them. They had faced impossible odds, broken unspoken laws, and yet emerged stronger together. The bond that had begun as a small gesture of trust had grown into something formidable, something that no prison, no law, and no species could contain. Days turned into weeks, and their influence continued to expand. Other prisoners began to follow subtle cues, imitating the calm, cooperative behavior of the human and the alien woman. The prison's rigid structure began to show cracks, not from rebellion, but from the quiet, undeniable force of connection. Hope spread, and with it, the realization that the galaxy's laws, built on fear and separation, might no longer hold true. The human reflected on what they had accomplished. Survival was no longer the goal. Influence, cooperation, and trust had become their tools. They had demonstrated that humans were not fragile, that humans could learn, adapt, and lead in ways the galaxy had never imagined. And the alien woman, disciplined and powerful, had learned that strength could take many forms, sometimes in calmness, sometimes in collaboration, and sometimes in the courage to defy rules without aggression. In the final moments of the day, as the soft glow of the energy fields bathed the cell, the human and the alien woman sat in silence, their minds connected in a way that transcended language. They had achieved the impossible: cooperation across species, trust in the face of danger, and influence within a system designed to suppress both. The galaxy, whether it realized it or not, was beginning to see the first signs of change, and the human allowed himself a rare smile. They were no longer simply prisoners. They were a force, a symbol, and a beginning. The laws of the galaxy were not just challenged. They were being rewritten quietly by a human and an alien woman who had learned to trust, survive, and grow together. The air in the prison was thick with tension. Rumors had spread beyond the wings, whispered from guard to guard, circulating through monitoring systems, and reaching the highest levels of the Galactic Council. Something unprecedented had occurred. A human and an alien woman had coordinated, not with weapons, not with force, but with trust and understanding, to stabilize the prison during repeated crises. Their actions had saved lives, prevented disasters, and revealed a strength the galaxy had never prepared for. The human awoke early, as he had done for weeks now, alert to the smallest shift in the cell. Across from him, the alien woman mirrored his movements, fluid and precise. Their connection had strengthened to the point that it no longer required thought. They acted in perfect unison, anticipating each other's responses and intentions. They had become a single force of strategy, empathy, and resilience. Outside, the prison began to react. Guards hesitated, unsure of how to manage prisoners who were no longer fully under control. Energy fields flickered less, but monitoring systems registered anomalies they could not explain. The council had noticed the reports and had decided to intervene personally, sending inspectors to evaluate the situation. The human knew this would be dangerous. If they misjudged, both he and the alien woman could face immediate termination. But he felt no fear. Fear had been replaced by purpose. He had survived impossible odds before, and now he understood something the galaxy refused to acknowledge. Survival was only the beginning. Influence, trust, and the courage to act against expectation were far stronger weapons than any laser or psychic probe. The first inspectors arrived quietly, blending with the guards. They were not here to punish. They were here to assess. Observing two prisoners who had defied the rules without violence was a challenge even for the most experienced. The human and the alien woman were already aware of their presence. They could feel the subtle shifts in the energy field, detect the imperceptible focus of trained minds. They did not panic. Instead, they coordinated, maintaining calm in a cell that had seen so much turmoil. The inspectors were taken aback. Reports had suggested anomalies, but the reality exceeded all expectations. The human and the alien woman, different species with opposing cultural instincts, were acting together flawlessly, coordinating movements, thoughts, and subtle energy flows. They communicated silently, influenced their surroundings, and even managed the minor unrest among other prisoners. It was unprecedented. No manual, no law, no precedent could explain what they were witnessing. One inspector attempted a test. They manipulated a small control panel near the cell, intending to provoke a reaction. But the human anticipated the change, signaling to the alien woman through their silent connection. She responded instantly, projecting a subtle pulse that stabilized the panel and neutralized the potential disruption. The inspectors watched in stunned silence as the pair worked seamlessly, not by force, but by understanding and cooperation. Hours passed. The inspectors ran multiple tests, attempting to provoke reactions, measure influence, and challenge the pair's abilities. Each time, the human and the alien woman responded calmly, efficiently, and without error. Each demonstration further confirmed what the human had known for weeks. They were stronger together than the galaxy had ever imagined possible. By midday, the inspectors were forced to report their findings to the council. The human and the alien woman had not only survived, they had stabilized the prison, prevented crises, and demonstrated coordination and influence that violated every law of species separation. The council faced a dilemma. Punishment would acknowledge failure, while recognition would challenge centuries of rigid control. Back in the cell, the human sensed the council's presence in the reports, through the subtle adjustments in energy that radiated from the monitoring systems. He and the alien woman exchanged a thoughtless acknowledgement, a silent affirmation of what they had accomplished. The human had learned that leadership and survival were intertwined. Strength was not measured by aggression, but by influence, adaptability, and trust. The alien woman, disciplined and precise, understood that her abilities could be amplified through collaboration rather than domination. Together, they were rewriting the rules of what it meant to survive and to lead. As the inspectors left, the human and the alien woman prepared for the council's judgment. It arrived swiftly, transmitted via holographic interface. Representatives from dozens of species appeared, their expressions a mix of awe, fear, and curiosity. The council had rarely convened over a single cell, but the situation demanded it. The human and the alien woman stood silently as the first representative spoke. "You have violated every law of species separation," the voice said. "You have coordinated actions, influenced other prisoners, and stabilized the prison without authorization. Explain yourselves." They had expected fear, aggression, or submission, not clarity and courage. The alien woman stepped forward, her psychic presence adding weight to the statement. She projected her thoughts, conveying discipline, cooperation, and recognition of the human strength. Together, they presented a picture of unity that defied every law the council had codified. "Your actions were extraordinary," another representative admitted. "But laws exist to prevent instability. You have created it by breaking every rule. We have prevented disaster, protected lives, and demonstrated that collaboration is stronger than fear." They were adaptable, resilient, and capable of forging bonds that reshaped systems. And when combined with the alien woman's discipline and insight, they had proven something extraordinary. The council deliberated for hours. Some demanded punishment, fearing the precedent that would be set. Others argued for recognition, noting the lives saved, the prison stabilized, and the potential for cooperation that could benefit the galaxy. In the end, they reached a compromise that none had anticipated. The laws of species separation would be reevaluated, and the human and the alien woman would serve as examples of the potential of cooperation. Punishment was waived, and instead they were commended for their actions. Back in the prison, the human and the alien woman felt the change immediately. Guards approached with new instructions, not of restraint, but of observation and support. Prisoners who had once feared them now looked upon them with respect, admiration, and cautious hope. The human realized that they had done more than survive. They had inspired change, begun to shift the rules, and shown the galaxy that humans could be catalysts for growth, not chaos. Days later, the council announced reforms. Laws that had separated species, forbade collaboration, and limited cooperation were rewritten. Humans were no longer considered fragile or unpredictable. They were recognized as pioneers of adaptation and resilience. The alien woman species also gained recognition for their ability to learn, adapt, and collaborate in ways the galaxy had never expected. In the cell, the human and the alien woman allowed themselves a rare moment of reflection. They had faced impossible odds, broken laws, and influenced an entire system without violence. They had proven that connection, trust, and cooperation could change outcomes that brute force never could, and they had done it together. The human smiled, finally allowing himself to feel the weight of their achievement. "We did it," he said softly. The alien woman's eyes reflected the faint glow of the energy field. She nodded, a subtle gesture that carried more meaning than words. Their bond had not just survived, it had thrived, changed the rules, and created a future that no law could contain. Outside, the galaxy began to shift. Other species took note of the reforms, observing humans and their potential for influence and cooperation. Colonies once considered fragile began to see humans as leaders, collaborators, and innovators. The ripple effect of a single human and an alien woman had begun to spread, slowly, across star systems. For the human and the alien woman, it was more than recognition. It was proof that the universe could change when fear was replaced by trust, when laws were challenged by understanding, and when two beings dared to cooperate across boundaries that had never been crossed before. As the light in their cell faded for the night, they sat together, connected silently through thought and presence. They had faced impossible odds, rewritten the rules, and demonstrated that humanity was not weak. It was a force that could inspire, protect, and lead. And the alien woman, once a stranger, had become a partner, a teacher, and a witness to the power of what humans could achieve. The galaxy, it seemed, had finally learned that strength did not always come from power, domination, or fear. Sometimes it came from connection, trust, and the courage to break rules that were meant to confine. And the human knew with certainty that this was only the beginning.